Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. I'm Dr. William Weaver.
I'm Dr. Sean Deneen.
And I'm Chandler Foster.
Today is a little different. We're introducing a new playlist, one that's focused on superheroes, like comic books, the big publishers, the smaller publishers, the characters everyone knows, and the ones most people don't know anything about.
If you're thinking superheroes on an academic podcast, that's the point, folks. Superheroes aren't just entertainment, they're a public record of what people feared, what they hoped for, admired, and argued about at different moments in history.
And their way to talk about culture without pretending that culture is separate from real events. Comics track war, politics, civil rights, technology, propaganda, and censorship, and shifting ideas about identity, sometimes even more directly than textbooks.
Well, exactly. This playlist won't be a trivia parade. It's not who could beat who in a fight. No, it's why did these characters appear when they did? What did they mean? And why do they keep coming back in new forms? One note about the playlist: it will constantly be updated and expanded, so you will need to check back regularly. Let's start with the obvious question here. Why in the world are we doing this?
Because these days, superhero stories are one of the longest running modern myth systems. For centuries, society told stories about exceptional figures to explain values and anxieties. Today, capes and masks are part of that same function. They're just mass produced and serialized.
Also, because the superhero genre has become a shared vocabulary. People who disagree about politics, faith, or history still recognize the same symbols: the secret identities, the vigilante, the power and responsibility dilemma, the government oversight storyline. It's cultural shorthand, folks.
And because comics are a surprisingly good lens for understanding social change, when norms shift, race, gender, authority, war, comics often register that very quickly. Sometimes they lead, sometimes they support, sometimes they resist. Either way, they document the argument.
Putting on my historian's hat for a minute, there's another reason. Superhero narratives compress ethical problems into vivid case studies. What do you do with power? And who gets to decide what justice looks like? What happens when institutions fail? Those are real civic questions put in a story engine.
And it's fun. Not some old, just corny fun, but it's genuinely interesting type of fun. You can talk about the comics code authority, and suddenly you end up talking about the Cold War, moral panics, youth culture, and the business pressures of publishing, all through one shared medium.
When people say superheroes are escapism, they're not wrong, but escapism doesn't mean empty. It often means the opposite. You escape into a story that lets you process something you can't process directly.
Historically, the genre surges when society is under stress. The late 1930s and early 1940s are the classic examples. Superheroes explode in popularity as the world heads into World War II. These stories offer clear moral alignment, sometimes simplistic, sometimes necessary.
Then the genre changes with the times. Post war, you get different anxieties: nuclear power, paranoia, science gone wrong, the feel of infiltration. Those themes shape villains, plots, and even the look of the art.
Yes, yes. And that fear of infiltration and all of those other issues. Chandler, it's very important. And later, you get superheroes wrestling with public trust. The question becomes less, can the hero win? And more, should the hero act at all? And who watches them? That's a very modern anxiety.
Right. Superheroes become mirrors for national debates about policy, policing, state power, surveillance, propaganda, and civil liberties. Those debates are not abstract. They're political history with costumes.
And because comics are serialized, they can adapt in real time. A character can be patriotic in one decade, disillusioned in another, and reinterpreted again later. You can track cultural mood swings almost panel by panel.
So let's talk about the medium itself. Comics aren't only stories, they're an industry. An industry reacts to markets, censorship, lawsuits, distribution, and moral outrage.
As a historian, I love this. That's where history gets concrete. In the mid 20th century, there were intense public concerns about comics and youth behavior. Frederick Wertham's Seduction of the Innocent book. This led to pressure campaigns, hearings, and ultimately the creation of self regulatory systems. You can debate the motives, but the impact is clear. Whole genres shrank, others expanded, and what could be depicted changed for decades.
And folks, this right here reshapes what the term superhero even means. When certain content is restricted, creators find other ways to tell stories. Sometimes it's subtle, and sometimes it's symbolic. And that's just not just an art story. It's about social boundaries.
This is also why we're calling it a playlist and not, oh, just a few episodes. We want to take time to do it properly. The history of publishing, the role of creators, the business decisions, and how all of that ties to what shows up on the page.
Plus, comics have been undervalued as primary sources. People treat them like they're disposable. But if you want to understand what was thinkable or unthinkable in a given era, what could be said out loud, popular media is often the best evidence.
Yes. And another big reason we're doing this, superheroes are deeply tied to identity. What I mean is who is allowed to be central, who is allowed to be powerful, and who is portrayed as a threat.
In early superhero history, heroes were often built around a narrow idea of the ideal citizen. Over time, that changes. You get new heroes, new backgrounds, new conflicts, and sometimes even backlash. Those changes reflect broader social shifts: immigration, civil rights, feminism, Cold War politics, post 9/11 security debates.
Oh, yes, and even when comics get things wrong, then it still matters. Stereotypes, erasures, caricatures, those are data, and they show what audiences were being trained to normalize and what creators were allowed or not allowed to challenge.
So, this playlist will include episodes on representation, but we will handle it with evidence and context, not slogans, not today's hot take. We'll talk about how and why portrayals change over time.
And we should say upfront, comics are not a monolithic single viewpoint. Different writers, different eras, different editorial mandates. Sometimes two comics in the same year can present opposite views and opposite visions of authority and justice.
Which is why this is a really good topic for this show. It's messy in a historically honest kind of way.
Yeah, it is messy.
Oh, yeah.
Let's get to the ethical engine of superhero stories. Power.
Superhero narratives ask broad questions and ask the same questions of political philosophy asks, just in simplified, dramatized form. When is it legitimate to use force? What makes authority legitimate? Is law the same thing as justice? That goes back to Victor Hugo.
Yes, it sure does. And the genre keeps circling one question. If someone can stop harm and doesn't, are they responsible? Honestly, I have asked that question to myself many times in today's time. And even though it's an old question, superheroes and their stories tend to make it unavoidable. It becomes an argument about obligation, personal and collective.
We'll also take seriously that superhero stories can normalize certain ideas, like the lone savior, the exceptional individual, violence as a solution, surveillance as safety. These aren't neutral themes.
It's important to remember they can also critique against those themes. Some of the best stories are basically structured arguments against vigilantism, against secrecy, against paternalism, against power without accountability.
And readers respond to that. Sometimes they want the clean answer, and sometimes they want the uncomfortable question. That tension, that's cultural history.
So, what are we actually doing in this playlist? Here's the structure.
We're going to do some thematic episodes. For example, superheroes in war propaganda, superheroes in censorship, superheroes in civil liberties, how science and technology show up in powers and villains, the rise of the anti-hero and what it says about trust, and the evolution of secret identity as a metaphor for modern life.
We'll also do character centered episodes, but they'll be used as case studies, how a particular hero changes across decades and why.
And we won't ignore the medium shift. Comics became films, games, and streaming franchises. That changes storytelling incentives, risk tolerance, and just what kinds of heroes do or don't get promoted.
And that's just another way of saying we're studying the modern culture industry. Who funds these stories? Who markets them? And who benefits from certain messages becoming mainstream?
One more question. Why now?
Because we're in a period where superhero stories aren't niche anymore, they're global. These stories have become a shared myth across countries and languages. And that means they can influence how people around the world imagine politics, conflict, and identity.
Also, we're in a moment now where people are arguing about institutions, government, police, media, and science. The superhero stories are basically built to dramatize institutional failure and the desire for accountability. That makes them useful lens right now.
And because when something becomes ubiquitous, it's worth analyzing, not to ruin it, but to understand it.
This isn't meant to be a classroom lecture, folks. Enjoyment and analysis aren't enemies. In fact, taking it seriously can make the subject more interesting.
Plus, comics are one of the few places where you can watch society negotiate its fears in public over years through a story that just keeps on going.
So that is the announcement. Things You Don't Know is launching a new playlist: superheroes, comics, and the real world.
We'll keep the tone the way you expected from us, grounded, historically informed, willing to look at different points of view, and willing to admit complexity.
And we'll keep it accessible too. You don't need to know decades of continuity or collect issues to follow along. We'll give you the context you need.
If you've never been into comics, This playlist is still for you because it's really about society, history, and the stories we tell when we want to imagine justice.
And if you are into comics, we'll try to give you something more than fan commentary. Where these stories came from, why they change, and what they reveal.
We'll start with some very well-known superheroes and move into some lesser-known superheroes, but still significant to superheroes. And we'll put them all in historic context.
Well, listen, thanks for listening to Things You Don't Know. We'll see you next time.
I'm really looking forward to this, folks. It will be a good exercise for my brain and a lot of fun, I think. Bye for now.
Stay tuned. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up, and let's uncover some secret identities.
Bye for now.